Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're excited to have you all in the room tonight. As you know, we are continuously moving forward, and know that at our town hall meeting back on October 29th that we have several citizens to come out, and we talked a little bit about the projects here in Charles City County. DEQ was present at that time, and after the meeting did hear the call that there was still some information or some additional questions. For the purpose of tonight's meeting, they will be discussing the Chickahominy power plant and the groundwater withdrawal for the purpose of this meeting. We know that DEQ is our state regulatory agency and has kindly taken the time of that schedule as their process for this permit to take on any questions that you all have. And so I would like to introduce Ms. Utah Snyder, who will come and lay the ground rules for tonight and introduce her staff. Because this is DEQ's meeting, we will allow them to take the floor and continue the process. Ms. Snyder.
Thank you very much, Ms. Johnson. We're very happy to be here tonight to speak to you about the groundwater withdrawal that's proposed for the Chickahominy power plant. By way of introduction, my name is Utah Snyder. I'm the director of the Water Planning Division at the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, or DEQ for short. DEQ is responsible for implementing federal and state environmental laws and regulations, and for the Water Planning Division, that includes Virginia's Groundwater Management Act and the Groundwater Withdrawal Permitting Program, which is the topic of our informational meeting here tonight. I want to thank you very much for coming out tonight and joining us this evening to learn about the plans and restrictions for withdrawing groundwater from wells that are proposed for the Chickahominy power plant in Charles City County. We appreciate that Charles City County made this facility available to us so that we can accommodate all of you, and I'm very pleased with the great turnout and the fact that the two of the supervisors and the county administrator were able to join us as well. Our information session tonight, as Ms. Johnson mentioned, was scheduled in response to several speakers at the community meeting, as well as some follow-up emails from people asking us for an additional opportunity to get information about the proposed water withdrawal. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is to provide you with this information about DEQ's draft requirements for withdrawing groundwater for the proposed power plant facility. These restrictions and requirements, as specified in a DEQ document called a draft special exception that some of you, I believe, have seen already, would authorize Chickahominy Power to withdraw a limited amount of water for a limited amount of time. Tonight's informational meeting begins with a presentation by our Office of Water Supply Director Scott Cutler, seated here to my right, about the proposed groundwater withdrawal, and then we hope that you will stick around and engage with us in conversation with our permitting staff. I want to point the folks out here in a little while, and we'll share with you who you can talk to. So what are we going to talk about during the presentation? As you can see here, we'll start with some background on occurrence of groundwater in the coastal plain. We will then talk about the difference between a groundwater withdrawal permit and a special exception. And then we'll talk a little bit about the results of the evaluation of Chickahominy Power's water withdrawal application, which resulted in the conditions that will be incorporated into the special exception. The presentation will also include information on the mitigation plan, which defines the required steps in the event that a withdrawal has certain impacts, for example, on existing wells in a certain proximity to the withdrawal. And lastly, we will talk about the next steps for the draft special exception, and these will include a 50-day comment period as well as a public hearing. What we would ask is that if you have any questions that come up during the presentation, that you please make a note of them so that we can answer them at the tables in our cafe-style setting after the talk. We have 4 tables that were going to be making available to you to answer questions. And once Scott has completed his presentation, I'll talk a little bit more about how that process works and how we're going to go about that. So before turning over the microphone to Scott, I would just ask you to please be considerate and respectful of everyone that's in attendance. A lot of people have turned out. We want to make sure everybody gets an opportunity to ask us questions, to get the information that they need. Also, please don't interfere with the meeting in any way. I think, you know, if you're interested in recording or recording us, then please stand off to the side so it doesn't block the view of other people. And lastly, you know, just have an informational meeting here with us and take the opportunity to ask us questions and engage with us. We have a lot of people that came out here tonight to be able to be of assistance to you, and we look forward to talking with you. So, turning it over to Scott here now, and our presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. As Yuta mentioned, my name is Scott Cudless, and I am the Director of the Office of Water Supply, and one of the programs that I manage at DEQ is the Groundwater Withdrawal Program. And tonight, Yuta went through the list of things that we advertised that we were going to be talking about tonight, and I'm going to go through those in tonight's presentation. The first slide here is to kind of orient you to the different geology that's within the Commonwealth of Virginia. Virginia contains 5 distinct regions that the scientists refer to as physiographic provinces. Each of these physiographic provinces has unique geology, topography, soils, and water. And for the purposes of tonight, DEQ is authorized to regulate groundwater withdrawals only in the yellow area shown here on this map. The yellow area shown here on this map represents the coastal plain physiographic province of Virginia. And this is where our coastal aquifer system is located. This coastal plain is comprised of mainly loose layers of different types of sand, silt, clay, rock, shell, and gravel. And those different layers provide storage for groundwater as they are vertically integrated between bedrock and the land surface. For all practical purposes, a groundwater withdrawal in one of these aquifers only affects other groundwater withdrawals within the same area. So by that I mean withdrawals in the yellow area may only potentially affect other withdrawals in the yellow area. So withdrawals in the yellow area won't impact or affect any withdrawals in the green area. So for all intents and purposes, these geologic units are separate and distinct and function separately from each other. Next slide. There is what the geologists call a depositional history to how those different layers were deposited in that coastal plain area that we looked at in yellow. I'd like to show you. Can't find that. I'm sorry. I guess I'll have to point. I had a pointer. I don't know what I did with it. So if you look up here where these layers pinch out, think of that area as Interstate 95, right? And if you look at this part of the aquifer here, think of that as where the eastern shore is today, okay? So over the course of geologic time, the ocean either was all the way up to Interstate 95, or at times it was all the way east of the eastern shore. And as the ocean moved back and forth, different types of sediments were deposited in layers that create the aquifers that we have today. So in some locations within that coastal plain, we may have as many as 8 or 9 distinct aquifers or confining units, layered, as I said, between the bedrock and the surface of the land. The things identified in this picture as fluvial sediments are the sediments that were deposited by rivers, and those are primarily characterized by gravels and other sediments that are very productive and hold lots of groundwater. The marine deposits, which were deposited when the ocean was closer to Interstate 95, are definitely characterized by more fine-grained sediments, clays and silts, and they do not hold as much groundwater, and they are much less productive than the other units. For all intents and purposes, the Potomac aquifer is dominated by those riverine fluvial deposits, and the other aquifers that are used primarily by individuals come from the marine deposits. Those aquifers are the Yorktown Eastover aquifer, the Piney Point aquifer, and the Aquia aquifer. So we have been in a cooperative relationship with the United States Geological Survey, and over the course of the last 40 or 50 years, we have collected hundreds of deep soil core samples to come up with this illustration. And this illustration is a picture of our current understanding of the location and general thickness of the sediment and confining layers that we have within our aquifer system. We call this collective illustration our coastal plain hydrogeology. Most water withdrawals in the coastal aquifer system come from the large aquifer at the bottom of the picture here. So this big thick unit at the bottom is the same as those fluvial deposits you saw on the previous slide, and that is the Potomac aquifer, and that is the most productive, highest quality water in the coastal plain, and therefore it is the preferred source for most users. So the statute and the regulation allows the use of 2 different kinds of authorizations to withdraw groundwater in the coastal plain aquifer system. The most common authorization is through a standard groundwater withdrawal permit. Those permits are issued for a term of 15 years, and these withdrawals are expected to be long-term withdrawals that will be renewed every 15 years. For groundwater withdrawal permits, renewals require a new application, a new technical evaluation, and that's a geological evaluation as well as a modeling simulation, and also a public review process each time that application is submitted for renewal after the initial permit. Another way that DEQ can authorize a groundwater withdrawal is through the use of a special exception. Special exceptions can be used for short-term withdrawals that are for a period of time that will be less than 15 years. These are one-time authorizations that cannot be renewed. All other aspects of the application, technical evaluation, and public process are the same as that for a standard groundwater withdrawal permit. For this particular project, DEQ is using a one-time special exception. Next slide. What kinds of conditions are typically included in a groundwater withdrawal permit or special exception? In any groundwater withdrawal permit or special exception, there are three primary parts. So when you see the draft special exception, you will see Part 1, you'll see Part 2, and you'll see Part 3. Part 1 are our operating conditions. These particular conditions regulate the operation of the facility. Operating conditions tell the permittee how to operate the withdrawal of their system. Withdrawal limits are included in that group of conditions, and these withdrawal limits are unique to each facility based on the details of the facility. And when I say details of the facility, what I mean are things like the number of wells, what aquifer is being used, how much they pump from each well, those kinds of things. Those are all specified in the permit. And the modeling results may also generate specific operating conditions as well that would be listed in Part 1 of the special exception. All other operating conditions are standard across all permits and special exceptions. This section also includes any required mitigation plan. And we'll get into some more detail in a subsequent slide, but mitigation plans are generally required when, as a result of the proposed withdrawal, the water level in the aquifer drops more than 1 foot, and this 1 foot of drawdown migrates off the applicant's property. That's two key points. Pulls it down by more than a foot, and that more than a foot drawdown extends off the property based on the modeling conducted by DEQ. Part 2 of every groundwater withdrawal permit or special exception are what we call special conditions. Special conditions are unique to each facility, and what they typically require is the collection of additional information or the requirement for additional action by permittees to address unique circumstances that are identified during the technical review process. So either something that came out of the modeling or something that came out of the application review. Part 3 of every groundwater withdrawal permit or special exception are the general conditions. These standard provisions are the same in every permit and special exception, and they are conditions that implement regulatory conditions that require compliance with the groundwater withdrawal regulations for such things as allowing access for inspections, responding to requests for information from the agency, and then other things like requirements for monitoring and record keeping and requirements for metering and maintenance of that equipment. So those are the kinds of conditions that are general in nature, and they apply in every circumstance where we issue a withdrawal authorization. Next slide, please. So here's the most basic information for the proposed groundwater withdrawal for Chickahominy Power. The proposal is to provide water for a 1,600 megawatt electric generating facility. It is located on a parcel off Chambers Road near State Route 106. The proposal is for the construction of 2 production supply wells. And the purpose of the water that will be pumped from those production wells is for non-potable uses for the facility. And those non-potable uses include water that might be used in the construction of the facility, water that will be used in the startup of the facility, and then operations water that is primarily in the form of evaporative cooling through an air-cooled system. The special exception, as you'll see when it's issued, the official draft is issued, is for a 7-year term, and that will be the term if this special exception is ultimately approved by the Water Control Board. Again, just a reminder, Special exceptions cannot be extended in time or be renewed beyond that 7-year specified term in this particular instance. Next slide. Every groundwater withdrawal permit or special exception requires that DEQ conduct what is called a technical evaluation in the regulations. And the technical evaluation is the primary vehicle that DEQ uses to determine whether or not a proposal complies with the terms of the Groundwater Management Act. The objectives of this evaluation are to determine the distance from the proposed wells where any of the aquifers will experience a drawdown of at least 1 foot in water level decline due to the proposed withdrawal itself. This is called, we have a term of art for that. We call this the area of impact, or AOI. As I go through some of the next slides, I'll probably fall into my shorthand and call it an AOI. But what I'm talking about is that area of impact where the water level is drawn down by at least 1 foot. In addition, this evaluation determines if the proposed withdrawal meets our primary standard for determining whether or not the withdrawal is sustainable, and that is what we call our 80% drawdown criteria. The 80% criteria is designed to protect the aquifer by ensuring that water levels never fall below a specific depth. And the way in which that is designed is it's designed to maintain a 20% cushion above the top of that aquifer so that that aquifer does not have a risk of dewatering. And that 20% cushion, the distance of that 20% cushion is determined by the distance between the top of the aquifer and the land surface. So whatever 20% of that distance is the level at which, after we do our evaluation, the water level has to remain. In addition, we look at changes in aquifer pressure caused by the proposed withdrawal, and we look at that to determine whether or not the flow around the withdrawal point is going to change the water quality. And what we're looking at there is primarily whether or not those changes demonstrate the potential for saltwater intrusion to occur as a result of the pumping. This evaluation estimated impacts from the proposed withdrawal using our 3-dimensional numeric groundwater flow model. This is a 3rd-generation model that USGS has built in cooperation with DEQ. And we also used an analytical 2-dimensional simulation. And that 2-dimensional analytical simulation is done using a different type of model. The magnitude of the proposed groundwater withdrawal drawdown for this particular withdrawal was less than 1 foot using the 3-dimensional groundwater model. So when that happens, our procedures require that we go and look at the 2-dimensional model, and that is what we did. And for withdrawals of this size, the 2-dimensional model reproduces the area of impact more accurately than the 3-dimensional model. So using the 2-dimensional model, the area of 1 foot or more of drawdown occurs no more than a maximum of 540 feet from each production well. So based on this evaluation, the drawdown from the proposed production wells on the aquifer is not expected to continue beyond the 7-year term of the special exception. So, what are some of the inputs into that model simulation? This particular model simulation included 2 withdrawal points within the Potomac Aquifer. It also included the identification from previous geological studies from previous wells on the site to determine the top of the Potomac Aquifer at this location. We identified the top of the Potomac Aquifer so that we can determine where the pumps will be set for each of those wells. And that's important because the pump has to be set above the top of the aquifer to also eliminate that risk for dewatering that I mentioned earlier. So in this case, all pumps will be required to be set above that 260 feet below the land surface. The models were run, both models, based on a maximum withdrawal of 30 million gallons per year. So each simulation used a daily average of 82,191 gallons per day for every single day during that 7-year period for which that withdrawal is authorized. Next slide. So here is an illustration of the area of impact shown here in yellow. Going to correspond with a polygon or a circle that you're going to see in the next slide, which looks at it as if you're looking down on the ground from above. Okay? So instead of seeing this in cross section, you'll be looking at it from above. So that's primarily what the modeling determines. And in this case, the area of impact is used to determine the need for a mitigation plan. A mitigation plan is required by regulation when this AOI extends beyond the property line of the parcel where the proposed well is located. A mitigation plan works under a rebuttable presumption that if a nearby well is screened or is withdrawing from the same aquifer and it's within that area of impact in yellow, then there is the presumption that any impacts that that well, existing well experiences after the new well is permitted and operational, that the new operational well is the cause of that impact. So in this case, to kind of go into a little more detail about it, well A is the only existing well that could be owned by an individual or another company or a commercial enterprise where the water level the water is coming from the same aquifer that the new well is withdrawing from, and it's within the yellow area within the 1 foot drawdown area there of the area of impact. In well B, what we have here is we're not withdrawing from the same aquifer, even though the well is within that area of impact. This well does not impact this well in any way. Okay? In this well, we are withdrawing from the same aquifer, but we're outside the yellow area, and therefore this well is not impacted by this well. Okay? So as I said earlier, in that yellow area there were those 2 sets of arrows on either side, and what they represent are the edges of each one of those polygons. So those red areas represent the 540-foot extent of where each of these wells is simulated to draw the aquifer down by a foot or more. In this case, what you can see is that the area of impact on this particular production well location does extend off the property line in the location shown here on this map. and therefore the special exception will require a mitigation plan. Next slide. So mitigation plan, as I mentioned before, inside that red circle, in the way I described relating to the area of impact, adverse impacts to existing groundwater users in the same aquifer are presumed to be caused by Chickahominy Power. Adverse impact claims must be supported by well documentation that meets specified criteria that are outlined in the regulation. And those include the things that I was talking about previously. Where is the well screened? How deep is it? When was it established? When did it start pumping? Those kinds of things, so that determination can be made. Again, the claim must include documentations that you own the well within the affected area. The documentation has to show that the affected well was constructed and operated prior to the date of the pumping started by the wells authorized by the special exception. The information about the affected well construction needs to be provided, the original static water levels, and the historic yield. The location of the affected well on the property needs to be identified, and the reasons why one believes that the withdrawal has adversely impacted your well needs to be provided as well. So, next steps. We will be posting the official final draft comment or documents, and that includes the special exception and the technical evaluation, as well as the supplemental documents, including the mitigation plan and other things that go along with that package by 9 a.m. Tomorrow morning. It will be available on our website that is at this link. And the other link that I provided is a link to the Virginia Town Hall, where you can track meetings of the State Water Control Board and follow when those meetings will be held that apply to this particular application. Next slide. So other next steps, we will be holding a joint notice of public comment and a public hearing. The public hearing will be held by a hearing officer who is a member of the State Water Control Board. The public comment period that will be advertised will be from December 26th, 2019 to February 14th, 2020, which is a 50-day public comment period. We will be concurrently advertising this public comment and public hearing in the Richmond Times-Dispatch and the New Kent Charles City Chronicle. And the public hearing has been scheduled. The public hearing will be held at 6:30 p.m. on January 28th, 2020 at the Charles City County High School at the address shown here in this slide. After completing that public process, we will review the comments received. We will make determination of whether or not changes need to be made to the documents that will be commented on, and then that will go forward to the State Water Control Board. Documents that will go to the State Water Control Board will include the draft special exception, revised if appropriate, and all of the public comments received and a summary of staff responses to those comments. The important thing to understand about the public comment period as we get to it is that comments provided during the public comment period will reserve the commenter an opportunity to address the State Water Control Board when they hold their meeting on this particular application. Now, that comment can take two different forms. You can either submit a written comment during the comment period described above, the December 26th to February 14th timeframe, or you can make oral comments at the public hearing that will be held by the State Water Control Board hearing officer on January 28th. In either case, that would reserve your opportunity to address the board when they meet. We anticipate that the board will be meeting in the spring or very early in the summer. Typically they would meet in late March or April, and then again in the early part of the summer. So that's what we're looking for at this point. Next slide. At this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Yuda, and she will provide some introductory comments to the cafe session that we hope very much you will stay for to ask questions of our staff and to learn more about the process.
Thank you, Scott. A lot of information, that's why we allowed most of the time of this evening to be able to engage with you and answer those questions that are of most importance to you. The way that we're set up is we have 4 tables that will have technical staff available to answer your questions. They're the tables next to the posters there that you see set up, one in that corner, one right in the back here, one over here, and then one here in the front. I'll point out the technical staff that's around to answer your questions. So we'll have Ryan Green, Tony Cario, and Joe Grist available, as well as Scott Cutlass. We also have some staff, some additional staff from our Office of Water Supply, Trevor Lawson and Cassie Porter. And in addition, we have 3 folks from our communications office in case you need help translating what we're trying to tell you. And that's Ann Wren in the back there, Nissa Rafe on the table over there, and Irina Carlos on the table over here. So we really hope we'll be able to meet with everyone and answer your questions. I do want to make a couple of additional points. Scott gave a great summary of how to submit your comments. It's important that you take a look at that public notice and submit the comments as it's specified in that notice. There's going to be a mailbox, there's going to be a mailing address, so it has to meet those requirements in order to be part of the official record. So just encourage you to take a look at that and make sure that if you do have comments that you want to submit, it meets those requirements. Before we break, just a couple of other points. It's important to let you know that the Virginia Groundwater Management Act and the withdrawal permitting regulations define what DEQ can and must do. The law and the regulations are explicit about the factors that we can consider when we evaluate a groundwater withdrawal application, and that's what we're bound by. So at today's meeting, there may be other questions related to these facilities that you have, or other environmental questions. We will not be able to respond to those. We do have information of other people that may be able to answer some of your questions. The staff that's here today is very well versed in the groundwater withdrawal regulations and the process that we went through. They've spent a lot of time and effort developing this, and they're happy to answer any questions related to that. And for any other questions, please take a look at the additional information we have, or explore some other options for getting some information on those. So we've talked about the tables already. There is, like I said, additional information, and that's the table here in the front left, on my left, where Cassie and Irina are. So that's where the more general information can be found. And then lastly, you've been great listening to us here, walking through this presentation. Like I said, it's very complicated, and I would imagine several of you made good notes about questions to ask. So just make sure you manage your time. We want to make sure everybody gets to talk to one of us. Around 8:15 or so, we'll do a last call to kind of see if there's anybody that hasn't been able to engage with us, to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity. And so again, I just want to thank you all for coming out tonight and joining us, and I'll open up the tables here for questions. To the tables.
See an impact during these 7 years. As Scott explained, we actually modeled these out to the maximum extent possible that they could have an impact. So with that in mind, and for the 7 years, we're only going out about 540 feet from each wellhead, and we just barely came off the property. I actually have it right over there. So it shouldn't happen, but then again, there's mitigation. This is a new one just came out today. Even though you're not in the area of impact, there is still the ability to contact the company and talk to them if you think you did have an issue. Now, I've had situations where people think they've had an issue, and they've been near it, and they've been inside or outside of AOI, but it also sometimes comes down to well had an issue. Maybe the screens got fouled up for some other reason. Not everyone keeps their wells up as well as they should. So it's a lot of factors that have to be considered. But based on the information you just told me, you would be outside the AOI. Now, for the swamp part, the swamp is not part of the Potomac. The swampland is actually, if it's connected with water, it's from what we kind of call the superficial or the Columbian aquifer. So that's the top surface. It's not confined at all. It's an unconfined aquifer, and it gets recharged by rainwater and groundwater, by stormwater, is where they get it. Yeah, no, because they know it impacts wetlands, and we have a huge issue about that. Okay. Why, right now? Okay. So what you want to do, if you think you've got somebody's impacting your wetlands over there, it sounds like the way you're describing it might be as draining down.
Power that we don't even need, and that it's also, you also are protecting the public, and that's part of what you have to do in part 2 is protect the public, but there is clearly going to be other issues.
Well, the way we protect the public is through the implementation of the 80% drawdown criteria.
Right.
In this case, it complies with the regulations.
Okay. Well, you have addressed my questions. Thank you so much. I'll pass it on to other people.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
Hi. How are you, Scott?
I'm Scott.
I'm Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
Song we talked.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Sarah.
Yeah.
I didn't think you were that tall. I'm sorry.
I am that tall. I think I was sitting down this last time I saw you.
Yes.
I was interested in why you all issued a special exception instead of 15.
Well, for a couple of reasons. One, by limiting the term of the withdrawal, we are minimizing the impact on the overall. And that's because the supply that they will be getting from Newcomb has already been evaluated and is considered in the overall withdrawal that is still permittable. And the second reason is that it will reserve that portion of groundwater for only 7 years, and then it will be available to water from the Columbia. And so that combined amount will, the end result will be that less groundwater overall will be withdrawn by the two combined localities.
And do you know whether the Mattaponi tribe is happy with that, or do they? No.
I do not.
Don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the permit was issued at least a year ago. It might be a little longer.
Okay. Right. The other question I had was, you showed the area of influence, the two red dots and one's going outside, and then you said that the law requires.
You want to go over by the chart here?
Oh, no, No, that's okay. You said that the law requires that the landowner that's being affected has to come in with all this documentation to prove that they're on the same aquifer and being harmed.
Yeah, well, that's correct.
Okay, so the part I don't get is why would that burden go on the adjoining landowner when your model already shows that's going to happen?
Well, it doesn't. Where does it show that?
Well, that's what the red dot means, right? Right, but this piece right
this
here.
is property owned by the gas company that's going to supply them. There is no.
Oh, that's not a. Oh, is that the metering?
Yes.
Ah, okay. I was turning around. Okay, so it's still all going to be the same, but if it goes outside of that, like, do we know who that is there?
Yeah, I don't know who that is, but the probability is very, very, very small.
Okay.
It would go beyond that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was questioning the 7-year permit that they have, if they would ever renew it, due to the fact they're supposed to tie in a new Kent County water supply, and they know they can't meet that deadline. They can't build a building, get to underneath the Chickahominy River, underneath the railroad tracks, and 7 or 8 miles down the road to hook to that water. So they're not getting a 7-year permit. They're spending billions of dollars. They're not going to satisfy with that. They're going to come back and renew that permit. And that's my whole point. It's not 7 years and done. It's 7 years and we can reapply. So hopefully DEQ will sit down and listen to us and make some considerations. The meeting tonight was informal. It should be a formal meeting where everybody, including myself, it's written, it's documented, and you can't change your mind. But I do appreciate DEQ coming out and talking to us, but this is not really what the Assistants of Charles City needed or wanted. We want a formal meeting, and we're not going to give up. We're still going to see if we can get one.
And it shows up in the technical evaluation. That's taken into consideration during our renewal process. It's not a given. I mean, we're constantly, this model that is built is state of the art, and they're always updating it to keep it that way. And they're putting more observation wells out there with this as well. So
it gives you more data.
It gives more data. So 15 years from now, let's just say what the technical evaluation may show then based on the additional data we've gathered.
Well, I guess I'm still just trying to figure out why do the special exception at all and not do the 15. I mean, if I was Dalco and I'm spending $1 billion on something, I would hate to get to the end of 7 years and not have my surface water connection and have to.
And that would be a question for Ballico as to why they are agreeable to this.
Yeah, I got you. So, well, thanks, Joe. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's good to see you.
Whether why they went through the 7-year permitting, not the 15-year permitting, and apparently that was what Ballico says is all they need is 7 years. Although it appears that in documents they provided earlier that what they wanted was 5 years. So it seems like they might be able to game it a little bit by going through the 7-year process, getting this permit, at the end of 7 years, applying then for a 15-year permit if they're not able to get a surface water connection through New Cape.
Thomas Martin. I live on Charles off of CC Road, which is off of 106, approximately 1/2 a mile from the proposed site of the facility that's being built. We didn't even know about the project until maybe 6 weeks ago. We've also had other projects going on in the area that we did not know about. It seems like the county is, to me, is kind of doing stuff behind the scenes and not letting everyone know exactly what's going on. So I think a lot of people are surprised about this. We did have a lot of people show up tonight voicing their concerns, so hopefully something will come of this meeting good. And we will be at the rest of the meetings now that we know more about what is going on. So I don't think personally that Charles City County needs anything like this. It's always been agricultural, and the people that live here, most of them plan to retire here. Never expected anything like this. And it just doesn't seem right to the residents that have spent their money on their homes to have to deal with anything like this. So it's really all I have.